This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
There we are, hour number 2, ready to rock and roll with the one and only Matt Verderame. Matt, you got all 10 digits? You didn't JPP yourself? You're good? Okay.
We're good. We're good. I'm okay.
All right. Just want to make sure. Remember, light and run. Do not hold on, folks. Light and run. You know, that's just what it's all about.
Yes. We had somebody like in three or four towns away from us who like legitimately blew their face off a couple of nights ago. Yeah. So we do them out here on vacation at the lake house here in New York. What we do is we put them on the raft and we row away. And if that thing tips and it's looking at me, I'm just diving in the bottom of the rowboat. And I'm letting the boat take the brunt. Okay, so yeah, it's all about safety first. I got kids. I don't feel like growing up without a hand or an ear or an eye or whatever we're talking about.
Amen to that, dude. Tell me about it. All right, so let me ask you something. I saw this story, and I kind of have been talking about this for a couple months now, that I think things will change down the line eventually, because, I think it's the inevitable, thing. Everybody's time comes and goes. And so things haven't gone well for the Patriots lately. They're certainly not going to win this division again this year. They'll be lucky to be a 500 team this year. So I saw in Pro Football Talk that, that tensions are rising in New England. And I've talked about this in months past, that if Belichick continues down this path where he doesn't really produce much in the next year or two, I can actually see him coming even back in a hot seat 2 years from now. If this season ends up with no playoffs again and not looking good, and you don't have a quarterback because neither one of those guys looks like the guy. And right now it just seems like they're falling behind all three teams, in the AFC East.
Yeah.
So do you believe there's any tension, or do you believe tension will build?
Oh, I'm sure there's tension. And I'm sure tension will build, because look, it's one thing if you don't necessarily get along with each other. Belichick and Kraft, I don't think I paint them as adversaries, but I think there's a little bit there, and that's natural. Look, they've been together for almost 25 years. I mean, I don't care who you are. 25 years, you're going to have your ups, you're going to have your downs. And I think with them, it's one thing when you're winning, you can bury a lot of that stuff. The other part of this is Robert Kraft, how much longer is he going to own that team before he really kind of turns over control of it to his son, Jonathan? I mean, that's a real thing. And you talk to people in league circles, and I think there's a thought that with Jonathan Kraft eventually taking over the team, is it going to look like a different team? A lot of times when you change ownership, it does, even if it does go from father to son, which it would in this case. I think with Belichick, they won for 20 straight years. And so you can go, okay, you know what? Maybe there's some tension here or there, but who cares, right? We're winning and we're raising banners. There's a different feeling to that when you're not raising banners and you're not even close. You're going 8-9 and 9-8, and you're going a playoff game in Buffalo, and they got crushed in that game. I mean, they could have given up 60 points if Buffalo wanted to put it on them that night. So I think you're right. I mean, it's an interesting point where you look at the division. You could argue, okay, the Jets might be a team that kind of they go up and then down quick because Rodgers, how long is he going to be here? But with Buffalo and Miami, as long as Tua is healthy, and unless Josh Allen, something haywire happens to him, they're going to be good for a long time. So it's going to be tough. New England's got a lot of work ahead of it.
You look at the Josh Allen situation, and the news story is that the media has blown the Diggs situation out of proportion. And
that's not true.
Wait a minute. Are we the head coach that said he was concerned?
Very concerned.
Very concerned.
Very
concerned. Are we the ones that were in the middle of the whole Josh Allen and Diggs thing going back and forth? What are we blowing out of proportion? I think we're the ones that have watched Diggs blow up himself, walking out of the locker room, having to be convinced to come back in the middle of a Dolphins game. I remember at halftime before the head coach had to console, Diggs. I'm sorry. we're always at fault. We're always the bad guy here, man, when we're not the guys that are complaining or fighting inside that team. I don't get it.
It's a lot easier to just point to the horde of media outside the building and go, so it's those guys. It's those guys. And listen, I will say this. Sometimes things absolutely get blown up in the media. And
Sure.
you get a media member or two who just want to have a headline and a click, and they go way too far. Fine, that's fair. That happens. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
In this case, Sean McDermott was asked a very simple question. It wasn't leading. It wasn't like over the line. It was just, hey, how do you feel about this thing going on with Stephon Diggs now? And his exact quote, I believe, was very concerned. Very concerned.
Yeah.
Come on. Like, you can't then turn around and sit there and say, oh, it's you guys. No, it's you. You were the one who told everybody you're very concerned. And by the way, the lasting image we had of the Bills last season was Stephon Diggs yelling at Josh Allen. Okay?
Right.
Like, he didn't show up to a mandatory practice. Like, it matters. I'm sorry. They are, of all the teams in the AFC that matter. I mean, I'm not talking about some team like it's going to go 4-13. Of teams that you expect to matter this year, they are the one that I think, outside of taking injury into the equation, has the biggest ceiling and the lowest floor. They are just, it is a weird thing going on there. Like, I could see a scenario where they put it all together and they're great and they go 14-3 and they're the number one seed and all that stuff. I could also see a scenario with them where 3 weeks ago in the year, they're sitting there like 8-6 and you don't know if they're going to get in the playoffs. And there's been all kinds of obstacles in their way. They have just, it has not felt right. It didn't feel right at the end of last year. Even, I mean, putting aside, obviously, the DeMar Hamlin situation, but just even internally, like the team itself, it just didn't feel right. Now you're coming into this year with all this stuff. They're an older team. I don't know how Miller is going to be at 34 years old coming off a torn ACL. Like, you could make a compelling case that they're not going to make the playoffs in the AFC. I wouldn't go that far. I think they will make the playoffs as a wild card team. But you could make the case. It's not insane.
Yeah, man, that would create insanity if they don't make the playoffs.
They just extended Bean and McDermott through 2027.
Yeah, that would definitely create some serious buzz. All right, on SI, you wrote the Dolphins have legitimate Super Bowl dreams.
Yes.
But it all depends on Tua. And so, not to give away the whole damn article because we don't want to do that, of course. We want you to go check it out. I retweeted it. Yeah, you know what? Let me retweet it again today. Retweet this thing, get it in there. So I just retweeted it again. So refresh it on the timeline. You could check it out there at Matt Verderame or at Big O Show. So just a little taste of that article so Dolphins can check it out.
I think the best way I can kind of tease it out there is I am very bullish on the Dolphins this year. I think that nationally they've been under addressed in terms of being a contender in the AFC. You hear about the Chiefs, you hear about the Bengals, and look, you have to. Those are the two teams that have been in the AFC championship game each of the last 2 years. Fine. I think the Dolphins are the biggest challenger to either one of those two teams. I do. Now, I think, again, as you point out, the line I wrote in there, Tua's health scares the hell out of me because it could just be a thing where he gets hit once the wrong way and you don't know when he's coming back, if he's coming back. However, I think Fangio is the biggest addition any team made this offseason. Any team. Everybody talks about Jalen Ramsey, and don't get me wrong, I think Ramsey's an excellent piece, but Fangio is going to transform that defense, which is why, by the way, in another piece I wrote, top 10 defensive players who could alter the season. Jalen Phillips is one of them. I think Jalen Phillips could be a Pro Bowler and even a guy who you look at and go, man, that guy had 14 sacks this year. Like, I think he's that caliber of a player. I look at Miami, and the questions I have are Tua's health and the offensive line. Like, I love Teron Armstead, but again, health. Like, can he stay on the field? Can he be on the field?
It's fair.
Can the rest of the unit, they don't have to be great. Can they just be good? Can they just be a good, solid, 10th best line in the league type, right? If they can do that, I think they're better than Buffalo. I think they're better than the Jets. I think that they are at least good enough to challenge Kansas City and Cincinnati home or away. Do I think they're better than those two teams? I got to see them do it. And I'd say that about any team. By the way, I like Jacksonville a lot this year. I think Miami's a more complete roster than Jacksonville is. But I mean, I do. I don't think that Jacksonville is near the defensive personnel that Miami does. The question with Miami is,
Miami's secondary might be one of the best, if not the best, in the NFL.
Yes, I totally agree with you. So I think Miami has the capability. Like if Miami played Cincinnati in a playoff game, I'll say one thing about the Dolphins. You just mentioned it. They could go in there and not be totally terrified of the perimeter players in Cincinnati.
Right.
They can play them. They can match up with them. And the Bengals can't match up with their corners against Hill and Waddle and everybody else, right? So I think Kansas City and Cincinnati, you've got to give them their respect that they're at the top. But Miami, like I would not be shocked to see Miami in an AFC Championship game this year and really like have a shot to win the game. I think it's totally in play.
So check out that article. He's got it there at Sports Illustrated. Check out his timeline there on Twitter at Matt Verderame. Matt, I would imagine that if you didn't have your Netflix subscription, you have re-upped it just for the Cowboys series.
Oh, it's so funny. Somebody asked me, I have super follower capabilities on Twitter. So I do one every Friday with these super followers. And somebody asked me a couple weeks ago, apropos of nothing, they're like, what would be the series, like the Last Dance in the NBA? What would be the thing you'd want to see in the NFL? And I said the early 90s Cowboys would be unbelievable. And now they're doing it. So I'm glad I was on top of that one. I can't wait. That's going to be amazing.
Yeah, but it's these Cowboys that they're doing, right? That's the problem, right? It's not past Cowboys, right? It's this Cowboys are they doing, right? Is it? Is that what it is?
Early 90s Cowboys.
Oh, it is? It's going to be early 90s?
Yeah, it's going to be incredible.
Oh, okay. All right. So that'll
I'll
be good.
I'll check out while we're talking, but I'm like 99% sure.
I thought maybe this Netflix stuff might be like the new Cowboys, and that's kind of like what I'm afraid of. Like,
yeah, no, it's a 1990s Cowboys getting a Netflix docuseries.
So are we going to have like old film of it?
I would think you're going to have old film like spliced in with like current interviews, kind of like we saw at The Last Dance. But I don't know how far they're going to go in this thing. It's Netflix, like they can go further than like ESPN could or something.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what this is going to be like? I mean, you do know what it's going to be like, but like Michael Irvin and Nate Newton and all these guys in like 1991.
Will they allow them to, or are these guys going to talk about what they did in the past and all? Because it was a different world in the 90s. Yes. Like, see, 90s Cowboys, very interesting. These Cowboys would not be interesting whatsoever. No. So, but that's the part I'm intrigued about. Will they actually allow them, or will they even want to talk about the past?
I don't know.
Because people are so touchy nowadays, dude. It's like they hold it against them.
Maybe, but I gotta say that. Like, by the way, if anybody's listening and watching, and they're not familiar with the early 90s Cowboys, like go do a Google search of some of the things that happened with that team. Okay, I'm doing a piece right now as a sidebar to this. And it's a huge project we're doing at SI. I can't give too much of it away, but part of it's going to involve trying to track down and talk to some of these players on the 1990s Cowboys and or the coaches. And like when I do research on it, there's stuff like I know in my head. I mean, I remember watching those teams. I remember, like I remember in my head, I know stuff about it, but then you like do research and stuff that happened. Like if it happened now, guys would be suspended for the year.
The guys White House, no, not just suspended for the year, but they would be, oh man, they would be treated like complete like aliens, dude. I mean, the White House is something that was like nobody's ever done shit like that. Like they had a house that was just for partying, and it was called the White House.
Yeah, we're not talking about 1600 Pennsylvania.
No.
Different White House.
Although, just like 1600 Pennsylvania, you could find cocaine there.
That's right. It's
red, white, and blow. Yeah, baby.
Yeah. And then, hey, let's go win 3 Super Bowls. That's one of those teams I think about sometimes, like things that happened before social media, before we all had a video, capabilities in our pocket, right? There are certain things like Michael Jordan has a gravitas now that I don't know that he'd have if it was in the LeBron era, because people would have filmed him at like Atlantic City at 2:00 in the morning gambling, right? People would have just been like, hey, MJ, smile. And like, that's all we would have talked about the next day. None of that ever came up except for like one Ahmad Rashad interview. And it was like, okay, we're going to knock this out and then we're going to go score 50 on the Knicks. Like it was over. Whereas now you'd have all these things like that 90s Cowboys team. They would have had to blow that team up years before they had to.
Oh God, yes. No, there was no way. There was no way they could have behaved the way they did in those days. Nowadays, they couldn't get away with it because of social media and everything was going. That's the other thing. Michael could not get away with being at a table at 2 a.m. because it would have been on social media all over the place. It would have been
talked about.
Now with Michael, it's a little different because it's not like Odell Beckham and his idiot boys that they go down to the beach, South Beach, in the middle of a playoff and then lose.
Trash locker room.
Michael's different. Michael went out and then partied till 2 a.m, got up, went to McDonald's, and then scored 50 on your head and you lost. You know what I mean? Like he beat your ass after he partied and then he kicked your ass after that. That's the difference with Michael compared to some of these other guys like Odell Beckham.
It's amazing like how many guys now, right? Like they sleep in a hyperbaric chamber, right? And they have all, they train in a hyperbaric chamber, and then they sleep in like those pressurized, like perfect oxygen things. And like a lot of these guys in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was like, yeah, listen, you know what? I'm going to lift weights for a half an hour, and then I'm going to smoke a cigar and go out to the club. And then we're going to come back and we're going to absolutely truck the Jazz. It's completely irrelevant. Anything that happened before this is about, hell, look at now. It's even further back. Like, look at Joe Namath. All the stories of Joe Namath where he'd show up to a game like hours late. He'd be barely getting dressed time for the anthem. Then go out and throw 4 touchdowns.
Oh, a sideline on a fur coat. You can't do that shit nowadays. Come on, bro. Fur coat and
world.
Sunglasses.
World.
Right. Yeah, it's a different world. He's in the huddle and he's sticking chew in his mouth, and he's trying to call the plays and they're all laughing because he's sticking chew in his mouth and then that come on, bro, give me a break. What quarterback is practicing with a ball of chew in his mouth, man? Come on.
I'd love to ask a guy like a Bobby and Lane. For those who don't know, great quarterback of the Lions in the 50s. Like, guy who is known for a little off-the-field activity. Like, how do you feel about Tom Brady eating avocado ice cream? Like, I love to think, what? It's so different. Everything's so different. Everything's so specialized. Look, the athletes are better than they've ever been in most cases, but it's just so funny the way that, that 90s documentary, if they do it right, you're going to see a bunch of guys who just were lunatics who are great football players, and it went together for 4 years in Dallas, and they won 3 Super Bowls.
If I'm correct, Lane won a championship for the Lions, right?
Oh yeah, he won multiple. He won like 3 of them.
And then after him came a guy named Rote, I believe, that won a championship.
Tobin Rote.
Right? Yep. And Rote, by the way, little nugget for you all out there, Rote is the only quarterback in NFL history to win a championship in the AFL and the NFL, because he won it with the Lions and then went and won it with, I believe,
63 Chargers.
The Chargers, exactly.
Yep.
Yes.
Right before Huddle took over. You're right. Yeah, Lane won 2 in Detroit, I believe it was, and Rote won 1, and then got cut.
And then got cut.
And went to, because the Chargers, well, we don't have to go on. But yes, won the 63. One of the great offenses of all time, by the way. The 63 Chargers. Lance Allworth.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people think they would have crushed the Bears.
Yes.
During that time. And they actually kicked their ass the following a couple years later in the preseason. I remember they ran them up like I think Kansas City ran it up on Hallis like
66, 65. Yeah. Well, back then, it's funny, like those preseason games, because that was after they agreed on the merger. So they're like, we'll play some preseason games between the two sides. It was like blood sport with those two teams, like those two leagues. Yeah, where like one of the famous is like the Broncos beat the Lions in a preseason game. The Broncos were awful, and the Lions are like a pretty good NFL team. The Broncos beat them, and that was like a huge black mark for Detroit. But yes, the Chiefs beat them. I believe it was 65-21.
Yeah, in fact, the Chiefs used to have a horse.
Yes,
They used to have a guy that was dressed up as an Indian, and he'd be on a horse. And every time they'd score, they'd run the horse around. And so in that 60-something game, hey, come on, man, forget the game. Take care of that horse. That poor horse is going to die from running around the damn stadium so much. You know, that was the running joke for that game.
Paint was having a tough night. Yeah. You got his laps in that night.
By the way, as an outsider, as this Dalvin Cook thing drags on, it just seems like it's better for Miami, right? Because, brother, nobody wants him. Like, nobody. Whatever he wants, the money, the amount of carries, no, everybody's saying, dude, we're committed already. We don't have time for that. But maybe you could come compliment us, and that's kind of what's left. Does it look like maybe the inevitable, he signs in Miami? Because he might be waiting for some kind of major injury or some kind of desperation. Outside of that, why wouldn't he sign with Miami?
No, I think, look, at this point, the longer it goes, the more you think that the deal is not exactly going to be a fortune. That typically tends to be the way it is, because if you got offered a deal that was a lot of money, I would have signed it. It's the same thing with DeAndre Hopkins right now. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, if he got the exact deal he wanted, you'd think he would have gone there already, right? I mean, and there's been a lot of speculation about, well, if the Chiefs were to extend Chris Jones and they can open up cap space and they could give Hopkins a deal because they've already talked to him, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, for guys like Hopkins and Cook, if they got a deal they wanted, they'd be signed. I mean, that's reality. So, yeah, I think the longer it goes, the more if you're a team like the Dolphins, you're looking at it and going, all right, well, the price isn't crazy, and it makes a lot of sense. And you know what? He probably wants to come here. You know, he's a guy from the area who could go play for a contending team. And if I'm the Dolphins, by the way, you've got Mostert and you've got Wilson and you draft a kid. But at the same point, if I'm Miami, I'm like, you know what? This guy's one of the best 5-6 backs in football. He's had 1,100 yards each of the last 4 years. And most importantly, if I'm looking at it from Mike McDaniel's viewpoint, I'm thinking to myself, I want to limit the hits on Tua as much as possible. So if we can hand the ball off to Dalvin Cook 20 times a game, that's fine. I'm good with that, right? I mean, I think doesn't mean you have to play scared, but you should play smart. And if there's an opportunity to just hand the ball off to Dalvin Cook and he's running for 4.5 yards a clip, that's cool. That works, So I think it makes a lot of sense.
What are you working on in SI so folks can check you out, my friend?
Yeah. So I literally I didn't just publish it, but the company just published it. A piece I worked on when I went up to Green Bay about how the city is dealing with the loss of Aaron Rodgers. And I will tell you, I know a lot of you probably are like, oh God, Aaron Rodgers, another story. And I get it. And I don't blame you. If you enjoy my work, I would really encourage you to read it. It's one of my favorite pieces I've ever written. It was a lot of fun. And it was really interesting. Like, all I will say is all you need to know about how they feel is about the back of one bar. It's a wall that faces an alley and how they painted it. And it was fascinating. It was so fascinating that when I went up there, I didn't go out to dinner that night. I stayed in my hotel room the whole night and wrote the whole thing in one shot. So it was an inspiring thing. It was really interesting. But got that, got a whole bunch of team previews still to come out. They'll run for about another 2 weeks, and then I get back from vacation and I've got a training camp tour that starts August 4th, and I am crisscrossing the Midwest. I'll be all over the place. Connor Orr and Albert Breer will be handling the East Coast, so one of them I'm sure will be down in Miami, and Gilberto Manzano is on the West Coast. So SI has you covered. Every camp, all throughout the summer, we'll be there, and we'll have a lot of good stuff.
Looking forward to it. Follow him on Twitter at Matt Verderame and catch him every week here doing his thing. Matt, as always, appreciate you, my brother. We'll catch up next week.
Take care.
Thank you, sir. That is the great Matt Verderame. Dolphins.
This is the